A webinar title slide transitions to a welcome slide displaying Norma Hollebecke's headshot.
Welcome to the Every Learner Everywhere Transform Learning webinar series. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. My name is Norma Hollebecke, and I'm the Associate Director of Innovation and Programs with Every Learner Everywhere. Some real quick housekeeping notes. We are recording this session for those who cannot join us today. And throughout the presentation, we do welcome your questions in the Q&A, as well as any comments that you would like to make in the chat. Before I introduce our panel moderator, I'd like to take out just a few minutes to tell you about Every Learner Everywhere and the mission of our network. Every Learner Everywhere is a collaboration of higher education organizations with the expertise in evaluating, implementing, scaling, and measuring the efficacy of education technologies, curriculum and course design strategies, teaching practices, and support services that personalize instruction for students in blended and online learning environments. Every Learner Everywhere is sponsored by the Gates Foundation, and here at Every Learner, our collaborative work to advance access to higher education centers on the transformation of post-secondary teaching and learning. We build capacity in colleges and universities to improve student outcomes with digital learning. Our mission is to partner with institutions to harness digital learning technology, driving innovation in higher education to improve outcomes for every learner. Transform Learning is a project funded by the Gates Foundation with the purpose of implementing digitally enabled evidence-based teaching practices as a mechanism for improving equity and the learning experience across U.S.-based post-secondary institutions. Digitally enabled evidence-based teaching practices include active learning, assessing and activating prior knowledge, data-informed instruction, formative assessment and practice, fostering a sense of belonging through an inclusive learning environment, instructional transparency, metacognition and self-regulated learning, and peer collaboration. These 8 digitally enabled evidence-based teaching practices align with the 7 teaching principles of the National Academies of Sciences, outlined in their report, Transforming Undergraduate STEM Education, Supporting Equitable and Effective Teaching. You can contribute to the Transform Learning community by submitting your own example of digitally enabled evidence-based teaching practice. You can browse existing examples and learn more about submitting your own example using the link posted in the chat. And now to our moderator for today's panel discussion. Dr. Archie Holmes is the Executive Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs at the University of Texas System. You can read his full bio on our website. Over to you, Dr. Holmes.
Thank you, Norma. And again, thank you for all of you joining us today. So we are going to be talking about this National Academies report on transforming undergraduate STEM education that I had the honor of chairing over the last couple of years. So we can go to the next slide, please. But before we begin, we want to make sure that we understand who's in the audience to help inform the conversation that I'm going to have with my other panelists. So if you could take a minute to answer this first poll question. We recognize that many of you will see yourself in different hats, but pick the one that you feel represents you best.
Poll number 1. I can best describe myself as a... Various roles are listed. National Academies logo, Archie Holmes visible.
All right, Norma, if we can move on to the second question that we have for you. In addition to knowing who you are and how you describe yourself, we'd also like to know a little bit more about your familiarity with the report that we will be discussing and some of the implementation.
Slide, poll question. National Academies STEM report. Rating scale. Archie Holmes video.
All right, Norma, thank you very much for that. So we noticed that we have a very wide variety of different people who wear very different hats and have different levels of experience with the report. So I'm going to give you a very brief overview of the report. One of the things that we're going to ask you to do, and I'm going to echo what Norma said earlier, is please put questions in the chat. I will weave them into the conversation that I have with my fellow panelists. So the report is really about one thing, and it's really to ensure that we have both equitable and effective teaching for today's diverse students. This report calls for a systematic overhaul. We can't just continue to make changes around the edges. We have to make a very systematic change in order to be able to be successful here. You can see some of the reasons why. There's a persistent gap in how research tells us we should be teaching and how it is actually happening. And institutions will then need to take an active student-centered approaches to all of these things. Ultimately, what the report argues is that strengthening undergraduate education is essential for building the workforce that the country needs, not just today and area, and making sure that every single one of our students is given an equitable chance of being successful. Our focus today is not so much on the report itself, but talking with three people who have been implementing various aspects of the report. So we want to give you a headline on how people are going about implementing this report. So we can go to the next slide, please. So the core of the report is in chapter 4 about these 7 principles. And so this is the evidence that the committee went through and said that these are the principles that are enabling us to be able to achieve equitable and effective STEM education, teaching, and learning. And even though this is STEM and was STEM focused, the committee feels very strongly that all of these principles can apply regardless of the topic that is ultimately being involved. Now, we also recognize that these principles then have to be applied in an ecosystem, and you can see the way that the ecosystem is kind of crafted here. Courses and instructors are obviously the place that most people think about where teaching and learning happens, which is absolutely true. But they also happen within curriculum, academic units, as well as within institutions, and executive stakeholders have a particular role. So this is one important way of being able to view one of the main findings of the report. The other big aspect of the report that I will highlight, if we can go to the next slide, please, is that in National Academies reports, there are categories of recommendations. And what's really special about these recommendations is that they ask a specific actor to do a specific thing. There are 15 in this report, and they're categorized around these areas. What do we need to do to make sure that the learning environments are equitable and effective for all students? How do we value and support the instructors who are doing the really hard work of making sure that our students are able to be successful? And how do we measure and advance system change? Now, I know a number of you have not read the report in full yet, but that will give you just kind of a flavor. And so I want to turn over to my 3 wonderful colleagues who are here to talk about different aspects of implementation. So we have Tracy Addy, Marco Marlonado, and Daisha Jackson-Sanchez. And so I'll just have them go in that order, tell you a little bit about the work that they have been doing, and then we will open it up for questions from you and from us as a discussion. So Tracy, ask you to go first.
Great. Thank you so much, Archie. It's great to see everybody today on this call. So I'm Tracy Addy. I oversee our new Institute for Teaching at Rutgers University, New Brunswick. And I also served on the committee that was part of creation of this report. So it's been an amazing experience to kind of think about not only creating the report, but also, as Archie mentioned, this implementation idea, which is the foundation of why we're talking to you today. So I wanted to share with you a couple of efforts. The first one is going to be community. So you might think about, how do I get started with this? What do I do, to think about implementing these principles that Archie mentioned that are in the report and some of the recommendations? Well, I'm going to share with you one example of a community in which I've been involved more recently, and also kind of challenge you to think about your own communities and those that you can actually think about that could also implement the report. So the UERU, Association for Undergraduate Education at Research Universities, Undergraduate STEM Implementation Community, has basically been formed to really think about and grapple with the report and how we can actually implement the principles and the actual recommendations. The participants include a variety of different leaders from across, universities within UERU, about 30 institutions. And my wonderful team that I'm a part of for the leadership team is also pictured as well on this particular slide. So in this community, we've asked them basically, what are some things, you would like to kind of get out of this engagement, these endeavors? So we meet roughly monthly, and we set these topics that are really focused on implementation. So we've done things like examine our strengths and our challenges with regards to all the recommendations of the report. So that's a great place to start. Also, the various institutional initiatives. So some have talked about or brought foundational course initiatives and things that they've been working on in their institutions. In addition, we've had sessions around data. How do we use data? That was also in the introduction as well. I know Norma talked about that a little bit with Every Learner Everywhere, but using data to inform our choices. We've also had sessions on peer coaching. So actually bring a issue or a challenge that you have and get feedback on it from colleagues. So those kinds of things and sharing out of different conferences, initiatives have been a great support in this time where it's like, how are we going to do this work? You know, who's our supports and our systems for that? So I would absolutely challenge you to really think about how you can think about community with this report. You can think about like maybe you read it with colleagues and form a community that actually will go and think about implementation, or you're sharing your challenges and successes. If you're in UERU, you could join this community, or maybe you have other disciplinary communities that you can be a part of. So that's the first example of implementation that I think is really pivotal because I mean, community is really going to help us in a lot of ways kind of achieve the next steps. The next example I will give you is scholarly efforts. So we know that this NASEM report, you know, it has so much in it, and it will continue to be a reference for, I think, many in undergraduate STEM education. So I would also just offer, think about like, you know, how can you share your efforts in a scholarly way through publication? You can cite the report, etc., you know, as it resonates with you or as you're thinking about implementing the recommendations. We currently, Cassandra and I know she's also, I think, on this webinar, have an open call for a book. And this book is actually going to really explore implementation of the report. So it's a specific effort called just for that. And the wonderful thing is you still have time if you want to write a chapter proposal because the chapter proposals are going to be due on April 6th. So this book is part of a series through UERU that is really looking at kind of these equity imperative. And there's a series of books that are coming out. So this one will be in that series as well. And we are basically asking for any kind of level of thinking about implementation of these particular principles and recommendations in the report. So you can be an individual instructor, you can think about it at a department level, school-wide level, institutional, multi-institutional organization, etc. We want it at all levels because we know that, you know, this ecosystem, as, you know, I think Archie was also mentioning, that, you know, we need a lot of different actors within it to be actually contributing to this change. So we want to be able to showcase that. Feel free to go to the links in the chat.
Text, open call.
Basically, the second link there will give you the website that describes the call a little bit more. And we will notify everybody in May. And then we anticipate that in the summer, we'll kind of touch base with the authors and then start having the first drafts due in the fall as well. So those are a couple of examples of implementation efforts. And these are efforts, again, that go beyond the examples that I just showed. You can also think about what they could look like for you, even if these ones aren't the ones that you would participate in. So I'm next going to pass the baton to my next colleague here.
Thank you, Tracy. Next slide, please. I'm Marco Morinato, and I'm the Executive Director for Educational Effectiveness at the University of Maryland at College Park. And I had the pleasure of working with Archie and Tracy on the NASEM report, and also I'm part of the undergraduate STEM community that Tracy mentioned. And hopefully we'll have a chapter in the book. We'll see. We're going to try. But I wanted to talk to you about the Alliance for Better College Teaching, or ABCT. The ABCT envisions a system where all students experience supportive and effective teaching in every class. So you can see how that is a very strong tie into the NASEM report. We know that elevating teaching is a systemic issue that involves the entire higher education system, from colleges to disciplinary groups to policymakers. And we're trying to prioritize teaching and make it equitable and effective as per the core NASEM principle. We believe that this will help all students and institutions fulfill their goals. As you may imagine, the NASEM principles and recommendations interweave throughout the work of the Alliance. Now, who are we in the ABCT and how are we set up? Well, it consists of three parts. First part is the Leadership Council, of which I am a member, along with Isis, Corbin, Brian, and Adriana. We have the Better College Teaching Network. This is a growing number of institutions committed to elevating teaching excellence and willing to undergo deep self-reflection based on data. We are also piloting the idea of a Teaching Excellence College or University designation, which you see listed as the TECU designation or TQ designation. The third part is the Better College Teaching Coalition, also a growing set of national projects and organizations, including funders, disciplinary societies, and other entities interested in promoting teaching excellence. Next slide, please. So how will we achieve our vision? What is our strategy? Well, we start with 4 projects. The first project has to do with evidence. So we're producing research briefs for multiple audiences that connect teaching excellence to advancing student learning and success. And the NASEM report is a treasure trove of evidence that we will be linking into these kind of digestible reports. The second project is our strategic coalition. The coalition I mentioned earlier in the previous slide. We will iteratively develop with that coalition the strategy and translate it to the broader higher education ecosystem. And then the network and pilot, also mentioned in the prior group, the pilot group of institutions that are part of the network are going to support, revise, and pilot the systemic redesign work moving forward. And our fourth project is really a measurement project. We will measure teaching excellence by developing, testing, and implementing approaches to evaluate teaching excellence for institutions and the public. And we're already right now working on a group of the first 8 institutions where we're piloting these measures. As we make progress on these first 4 areas, we will then expand in our phase 2 work by helping define teaching for student success. We are working to redesign graduate education to include teaching and new faculty development, helping scale that teaching development so that all faculty have the opportunity to improve, working on building that coalition through disciplinary societies that are part of the coalition, and then focusing on incentives where we support the integration of teaching for student success into institutional and faculty rewards and incentives. So what might you do to get involved? If you go to our website, which was put in, bettercollegeteaching.org, there's links for expressing interest, potentially getting your institution as one of the institutions that will pilot some of these measures, or if you're part of a grander coalition or some larger body, there's also a way for you to get involved from our website. So with that, I'll pass it over to my next colleague.
Thank you. Greetings, everyone. My name is Daisha Jackson Sanchez, and I serve as the Vice President of Impact and Strategic Initiatives at Lumen Learning. And so I'm going to share a slightly different approach or way of thinking about how you might implement the report and the principles that are present in it. So, but before I do that, I want to take a moment to share who we are and our approach and how the principles, before I go into details about how the principles of the report are actually showing up in our work and some of the actual results that we're seeing. So at Lumen, we build courseware for gateway courses, supporting over 350,000 students and 5,000 faculty. But more than what we build, I really want to hone in on and focus on how we build it. And while I'll be sharing from my perspective or our perspective at Lumen, my goal is to encourage thinking around how our approach can be transferred into broader educational environments. So there are 3 principles that are key and foundational to our approach. One is the equity-centered co-design, where we work with directly with student users, allowing their voice to actually shape what it is that we're building. When we say grounded in evidence, what we mean is understanding the root issues and the problems that we are trying to solve and connecting every design choice that we make back to evidence and interventions that actually address the problems that are at the surface of what it is that we're working on. And lastly, we partner with faculty to make sure we're building for real context, because it will not matter in the long run what we build if it doesn't account for the challenges that faculty actually face every day and the things that they have to navigate. So this is what we mean by intentional design and implementation, is really thinking about students and faculty, engaging them in meaningful ways, and connecting every decision that we make back to evidence-based practices and learning science. So what does that actually look like in practice? Here are a few. I'm just going to go through a couple of quick examples of how we are operationalizing the report and the principles in it. Again, these are specific to our context and the products that we've built, but they can be translated into any context. And so though I don't have a lot of time to go into the details of each one of these, if there's any interest in talking more specifically or even brainstorming how to translate it, I'm always open to have those conversations. So the first example that I wanted to highlight was the focus on active learning and engagement. So we provide instructors with step-by-step guides throughout the curriculum that help them move beyond passive content content delivery. So our underlying focus here is also on ways that they can engage diverse learners, because that is a key and critical aspect of engaging students and achieving student success for all students. Secondly, we provide faculty with data and time-sensitive interventions that give them signals on where students are related to the content that they're engaging with. So we make it easy for them to reach out to their students through our automatic triggers and provide them with information on where they may actually adjust their lessons before their students fall too far behind. And finally, and certainly not least, is we design to foster a sense of belonging. So we seek out students from populations that aren't always represented. So we are very deliberate about who we engage with so that their voices are being elevated within the design process. So we work to co-design with these students, embedding their ideas throughout. And additionally, we focus on inclusive language that motivates and normalizes struggle, because students have often told us that they feel like they are sometimes the only one that doesn't get it. And so that's important for us to keep in mind as we are identifying ways to keep them motivated and supported. We create content that reflects real lives and experiences of students, making sure that we have diverse representation of genders, ages, races, all the different demographics that are important in our current educational environments. And lastly, we also work to foster stronger faculty-student connections through activities such as our Introduce Yourself feature. We understand that technology can only support faculty and student connections so much. It can't create the conditions for belonging on its own. That takes the faculty member who values it and acts on it. But what we can do is actually design with that in mind and create mechanisms that makes it easier for faculty to actually enact those practices. So let me speak briefly about what it is that we're learning from this approach. Independent research from Digital Promise gives us some preliminary evidence that what we're doing is actually working. So I don't obviously have time to go through the details of the research, and there will be a final official report coming out in future months, so I would be on the lookout for that. But the research is still early, but what it's actually telling us is very promising. First, faculty using our Lumen One, which is the courseware that we've built with these practices in mind, are really enacting more evidence-based teaching practices. Secondly, more of those practices are translated directly into higher student engagement. And lastly, and arguably probably one of the most important aspects, is that students using the courseware are more than twice as likely to actually earn a C or better. So essentially, supporting our theory of change, these results together are telling us that better teaching practices lead to more engaged students, and more engaged students are actually succeeding at higher rates. But I want to close or end what I'm sharing here today with something that is that no statistic or quantitative data can actually fully capture, and that's the impact on students. So in a survey response, a student shared, because of this coursework, I've really been able to not only understand it, but apply it and participate within my group. And that's helped me feel valuable in my contribution. That is the potential and impact of deliberate approach that builds these principles into the learning environment. Not just better outcomes, which are obviously great, but students who feel like they belong in the room and therefore feel more confident, engaging, and that is what actually is going to lead to the better outcomes in the long run.
Statistics quote.
So Deja, Marco, Tracy, thank you all for giving us a kind of starting point on the different ways that can implement this. This is all really exciting. And so again, for our audience there, if you have questions that you would like for me to make sure that our panelists get a chance to answer, if you can use the question and answer feature at the bottom to put those questions in, that would be very helpful. So Deja, I'm going to start with you, because I think as I go around and talk about this report, since it's been released last in January of 2025, the one big question I always get about, what about AI? Like, what about AI? And I wonder whether you all see AI as different than the technology you've been working on, whether you see it as a standalone technology or how it gets embedded. I assume not, but I wanted you to expand on how we should think about AI and the role of technology.
Sure, thank you. As everyone, of course, we are grappling with AI. So we're really thinking about and it's something that we are in the midst of continuously figuring it out. And a lot of the practices that I just mentioned are things that we are engaging with. So bringing faculty in on those conversations, talking with students, and also really thinking deliberately about how it is embedded or what we create even that could be in conjunction with the technology that we already have. So whether it is standalone or embedded, I keep coming back to the same design question that I just recently mentioned, and it's making evidence-based practices easier for faculty. So as you think about AI, is it making it easier or is it adding another layer on that faculty have to manage? Because if we're not intentional, and that's sort of
Daisha Jackson Sanchez gestures in a 4-panel grid.
the underlining goal of what I would like to get across is that intentionality is really key. And it's about how are we integrating it and making sure that what we're doing, it aligns to the actual problems that we're trying to solve. So
Archie adjusts glasses. Others listen.
so there's a lot that I could say about this one, but I'll just end by saying that what I would caution us against is pretty much is assuming that because it's AI powered that is automatically effective, and the evidence base is still, has to matter in all of that what we're designing. So it can surface patterns and different things, but again, it's a matter of thinking about how the human in the loop plays a part in that and being very intentional about that.
So based on your experience, right, the idea is that human in the loop, as you kind of talked about earlier in your remarks, right, is that human connection between the faculty and the student that really builds a sense of belonging, and we can't have technology do that. I think you would assume the same whether we're talking about chatbots or something automated. Is that your sense of, well,
Absolutely.
that's not going to happen either? Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that we need to make sure that we're not thinking about AI differently than other technologies, right? And so it can't be effective without that human aspect.
Daisha Jackson Sanchez moves.
Tracy or Marco, yeah, go ahead, Marco, please.
Yeah, I just want to add, I think AI is giving us the opportunity to really tailor learning opportunities for students, as well as make instructionally relevant information more accessible to faculty. So we've been testing AI tutors for students, as well as AI-based tools to help improve faculty artifacts. And that really can assist, I think, with pedagogical and instructional development. But it is still an area that we need to make sure that the advice given is really tied to the research. And I think our report can serve as a good base for providing some of that advice.
And Tracy, are you seeing this in your role as, running and teaching and learning? And my guess is you have faculty coming in all the time asking about AI and how they can think about it. I'm wondering what you have to share here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we have large AI initiatives to help support literacy, understanding, and, supporting their students, especially in the midst of that it's used and it's so accessible to students at this moment. So I agree with what my colleagues have shared. I think it needs to be intentional and evidence-based. There are definitely potentials for equity in supporting equity through AI. We've seen some kind of early on, kind of hints of those. I can't say it's like the research is solid at this point on it, but being able to support diverse learners in various ways and supporting their learning and whatnot. But then also there's that challenge of like, I agree, like the human has to be in the loop. We have to be intentional. We have to be careful about if we're actually doing a detriment to students' learning as well. So I see both, we talk about both the potential and the challenges right now of AI. And as we continue to research it and understand it better rather than just eagerly adopt it, we really need that kind of work to really see what's truly working.
Yeah, and what I hear from you, Tracy, a lot is, we need to make sure that we're doing the work in such a way that we can learn from it, so that we can improve it as it goes forward, as opposed to assume that it's mature enough that we know that it will address things that we want to make sure that are addressed in our particular classrooms. Marco and Tracy, as I reflect also on the report, I mean, one of the conversations we had a lot about is how do we help people take the next step, right? And I know you all talked about the work that you're doing with community kind of based work, but what would you give advice to whether it's a faculty member or a leader of an academic unit who may not have that community kind of right off the bat or may not be able to find that immediately? What advice would you give them on how to kind of start down this work or this path?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Archie. I can take that first.
Yeah.
So essentially, what I found the most helpful in working with, even on my campus, colleagues around the report is to actually have them look at the principles, like think about them, and think about if it's an instructor in their class, in their courses, where are they seeing these principles enacted? Where are they not? So they're almost kind of doing their own assessment of where is their growth, where is their opportunity for me to actually do this in different ways. So once that happens, I think that's the first step, right? Look at your syllabus, look at your course, think about your teaching. Once that happens, then you can start to kind of hone in on a few areas. I'd say start small, start with something kind of that you can basically more likely take action on a little bit easier. And then think about your long term. So, for example, let's say it's transparency. I'm like, oh, am I being transparent with my students, right? So one of the principles. So maybe, in this one, in the report, we talk about the tilt framework. So what can I do? Well, I can actually think about tilting my assignments more. Am I doing that in all my assignments, right? So that's a very practical thing as an instructor to actually do. I can think about my policies. Are they transparent, right? So taking those kind of steps, I think, is a really helpful thing for at the instructor level. At the higher level, like if you're an administrator, a department head, you're a dean, etc., what I think is a helpful thing is to actually still think about these principles and the recommendations. Some of the recommendations are very tailored to different stakeholders, different actors, right, at the institution, and just really think about where do you see opportunity? I mean, we think about some of the courses that are high success courses, like the foundational courses or etc. Think about your department, their curriculum. Where is that, and what can where are these being enacted? Where do you see opportunities? And then just basically support colleagues in thinking about this themselves as well. So those are some places to kind of start. If you don't, have a natural kind of community, but doing that kind of self-assessment, I think the principles really lend themselves to that. There's really clear kind of recommendations, but you can do that process independently of other people as well.
Yeah, Marco, anything to add?
Thank you, Tracy. Yeah, I think I'll say first that I think the report in its entirety is a lot to take in, and it has to be taken in relevant pieces. I think the principles and the recommendations are an interesting entry point into the work because it starts to situate in something that feels tangible. And I think it's great. What Tracy is mentioning really makes a lot of sense to me. And I've seen similar things happening with our teaching center in the report.
Molinaro gestures.
I do think the way that the chapters are laid out can help people if they take a deep look into the table of contents. They can target whether they're a faculty member or administrator. There are certain chapters that will speak to them, and they can start with those chapters. You don't have to read this from beginning to end, as we've talked about quite a bit. I do think there's some other things that we can do, though. I'm very tempted to create a report exploration tool that using AI and some, really bringing in all of the references into that tool, I think we might be able to create a kind of a just-in-time teaching effectiveness helper that might work for a faculty member and an administrator. My colleague, Michael Palmer at UVA, has already tried to encapsulate some of the teaching and learning consultation process in a chatbot tool, but I think we could do this very specific to the report and similar kind of work there. It could be the core data. I think, lastly, I'll add, I think it's important to keep in mind that it just takes time to bring these things in. When I look at the work of the ABCT that I mentioned to you, it's really highly aligned with the report, in part because it was incubated alongside the report in many ways. And there was some cross-weaving between the two projects. So it helps inform the systemic approach of the Alliance for Better College Teaching. I also think in the examples that we've been hearing about, whether it's Lumen Learning or whether it's Every Learner Everywhere, whether it's the work from the UERU community that Tracy's mentioning, these things are not new. They're not coming out of, totally fresh, totally different kinds of thinking. There's a tremendous amount of overlap in thinking. So I think don't approach the report as like everything in here is going to be new. Kind of try to see where it already fits into some of the things that you might have been working on, and then add to it. I think it's a process where we just keep moving forward.
Yeah, Deja, I wonder your thoughts about this, especially, Marco brought up this idea about technology helping somebody digest the report, and somebody who works in that technology space. I'm really curious as to your thoughts about.
Yeah, So one of the things that we do at Lumen as well is we host communities of practice, and so we will partner directly with institutions as well as individual faculty that are interested in exploring evidence-based teaching. So that's one aspect, and we do that through technology. Typically, it's in a virtual environment, and so something I just want to just emphasize that has already been shared is really around our approach is around one small change, right? Because there's so many different things that you could be doing, and so and it can be overwhelming. And so it's a matter of this week, let's really hone in on what is it that you might want to change in this moment. And something else that was also shared is that's really important is that what we hear from faculty often is that I'm already doing this, I didn't have a name for it. Right. And so then this allows you to actually start to put name and language to the practices that you're already doing, which can basically give a little bit more strength to you continuing to do those, but then also introduce some new ideas to you. And then you pick one thing. The one thing that hasn't been shared that I think is really important in our approach, and I think is important in period when you're thinking about transformation, is that we are really it's really important to us that we give faculty time to reflect. So once you implement those actual changes, now you need to take some moments and thinking about how well did it go? What would I do differently next time? So that you're really starting to think about how, again, it's that intentionality and how am I embedding this in my approach, not just, again, adding it as an overlay into what you're already doing.
Yeah, and Deja, I really appreciate you bringing that up because Marco and Tracy knows that was a really big part of the conversation we had as a committee, right? Is that this is a continuous improvement process. This is not you pick just one thing and you check off a list, as you know, and as Tracy said, start where it's most comfortable with you. I think one of the downsides of course, writing a report like this is you have to list the principles in a particular order, which then suggests to some that there is an order in which to do things. Part of the reason why we showed that wheel is that there isn't a place to start. It's to start where it is that you are, what it is that you're trying to accomplish, and then it will grow from there as you learn more about the situation.
Tracy Addy points with her hand.
Situation.
And Archie, I just
Yeah,
want to mention one more thing. I wanted to also uplift the things that Carrie put in the chat. So
sure.
those are also some resources that tie in this idea of reflection and reflection at different levels, some of the instructor level, institutional level. So engaging in that reflection, those particular resources, some of them at the end of that website will actually allow institutions, individuals to actually engage in that reflection.
Yep. Yeah. Great. Great. Glad to hear it. So I am going to ask you a little bit more, Deja, since we have a little bit of time to go a little bit deeper into some of the methodology. I'm really impressed about the 2 times increase in the students who are able to achieve, a C or better. And I mean, do you have, can you tell us a little bit about how that research and what aspects of what it is that you've done that you feel have led to those really remarkable results?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, the research is actually being conducted by Digital Promise, which is independent from Lumen Learning. They were funded through the foundation to conduct that research, and the independence was actually a key and critical aspect of the process because we didn't want our design and what we were doing to actually influence the research in any way. So we were designing on one side, they were researching us on the other side just to make sure we had that, that separate approach going. And so so as far as the methodology, again, that would be primarily Digital Promise, and there's a report that's going to be released soon about like the implementation, and then they're also going to release one around the efficacy. But essentially, they were looking at students' reports of engagement and whether or not they felt like their faculty were actually engaging in certain practices, and they were comparing those to faculty that were using our particular product and whether or not they were using any other product or none at all. And so this is where, and they also have a nationally normed exam that they were giving to students to see if they were performing at different or the same levels as their peers. And so again, their research, but that's essentially what it was looking at. And they were also talking with faculty and assessing how often they were doing active learning and really looking at evidence-based teaching practices and if they were showing up in
4
the
panelists look forward.
in the instruction that faculty were doing. And so when it comes to our approach, we really believe, number one, I just get the privilege of sharing what we do at Lumen, but I work with a really great group of designers and individuals that we really were deliberate. When I say deliberate, we spent months, weeks talking about like what are the root causes that are leading to the outcomes that we see. What is the evidence that supports the ways in which we should be thinking about this differently? And then we started to incorporate students again into that approach where we had user testing centers at minority serving institutions that and so we also think really deliberately about power. And so we were relinquishing power in the design process and really allowing students to guide the prototyping and what it is that we were designing. And so we believe that a lot of that design and intentionality is what is leading to the results that we're actually seeing. So making sure that that was all a part of the product that we have actually built and put into the market.
Yeah, well, thank you, Deja. So we've gotten a couple of questions from our audience. One of them is about, how does this differ as the class size gets bigger? And I'm going to really maybe focus Marco and Tracy and Deja on your thoughts about, let's just say 100 or more, really large enrollment classes. How do we think that, advice on how we would give for somebody who's finding that is their challenge of trying to figure out how do they make sure that they do that equitable and effective in that sort of environment? And how can these principles be of help? Do you all have thoughts and advice to our colleague about that?
Absolutely. I think that is it's a really good question. And it's one of the challenges of absolutely that, we're seeing and facing. So for the large courses, thinking about interactive lecturing is big, right? So the active engagement, how can we do that? Just make sure it's not didactic, only kind of, absorb the passive of information. So different ways to make lectures more interactive would be like a first, starting point if that's done or, et cetera in the course. And then there's a lot of other practices. And actually, we're doing some really cool research right now that I can't wait to we publish. And it actually implicates large courses. But basically, essentially thinking about how to build my kind of community in those classes, even in a bigger class. So thinking about like how do we do more collaborative kind of engagement with the students in the class, building the instructor student relationships. We've done some work on thinking about just who's in our class. So that comes from our early research around inclusive instruction. And so it's this idea of also at the beginning of a class, just also making sure that you understand who's there and creating that community. We've done some research around, just using these forms to really capture your class. That can be done in a large class. It can be done in a small class. It can be done in a medium class, and also reported back out to the students to see who's in this community, right? So starting and setting the tone in those courses is going to be big. Now, it's always nice to have extra resources in those classes. So, for example, now thinking about learning assistants. Learning assistants are typically like undergraduate students that are, the purpose is truly to help other students learn. So those active learning, if it's possible, it's nice to have supports like that, right, in those classes as well, because they can actually help just, because one instructor at the front, just trying to do all of that with so many students is a lot. So being able to have those kind of supports is also important to think about as well. So I would say, focusing on some of these big things like community, active engagement, those types of things are going to go a long way in those types of classes. It will always have a different dynamic being a large class, but there are certain practices that can be particularly powerful. And actually, some of our work right now, the research I'm talking about, I'm actually writing up on it right now, is actually looking at specific teaching practices that, and how we can think about them even, across different class sizes. So I would definitely kind of lean into some of those and the normalization ones, think about normalizing, challenge and things like that, because these tend to be often introductory foundational courses that can hold students back, right? If they don't, do well in these classes, et cetera.
Mark? Yeah, Mark.
Yeah, so I'll just add, first of all, great suggestions, Tracy. The things I'd add that we maybe don't think about quite as much is you're going to have to give up some content. You need to create space. You need to create space for gaining those interactions. So that's probably the hardest thing, especially in the STEM side. for faculty to acknowledge that they can do that, and it's okay. The other thing I'd say is that sometimes what can change dramatically the feeling in a classroom is even the way you're grading and how things are weighted differently, and things like specifications grading or other forms of grading that value different types of contributions from students and don't place everything on traditional, just, a couple of midterms and a final. I know those we don't think of as so much as being important in a large class setting, but they can make a dramatic difference in the outcomes of students and in the general feelings those students have with their experience. So it can help with that sense of belonging, that sense of wanting to actually be there, which can open up some space for that community building.
Yeah, Desha.
Sure. I'll just add, I love the suggestions that are already shared, but again, I keep coming back to that human aspect, and what Marco just said as well around like giving up something is going to be really important. And if you think about large classes, often there is even a greater divide between the students and the faculty member. And so finding ways to humanize you as the professor in the front is really going to be important, like to help with that connection. But the other thing that I would say is really important too is, and I brought up power before, like we have to also think about the power dynamics in the classroom and what are opportunities for us to give students power and how to collaborate with them and have them see themselves as experts and that they are also able to contribute to the learning environment as well. And so there are ways that you can engage them in conversations that allows them to see the value that they bring into the classroom and that they are experts of their own experiences, and that can also help to build some of that connection and interaction between the faculty and the student.
Tracy, Archie, Marco, look forward.
Yeah, really, really great points all, and I want to emphasize, Marco, something that you said about, these what I will call very large, high stakes assignments, right? Right. When you're really signaling to the student is that that's the only thing that matters in terms of measuring their success, right? And if you can build a structure where the learning happens as part of a multi-structural way of the assessments and the grading, I think, as you said, Deja, that just builds that humanizing connection that makes everyone see that we're all together in this learning environment and we're all there to make sure that all students are successful. We are going to run out of time relatively quickly, but I did want to get to one other question that came in about how to help make sure that people have deeper engagement. It's one thing to be able to say to somebody, here's the report, read it, start at this place, Marco, as you said, maybe with this chapter or that chapter. But there is some time that folks need to really be able to do to be able to make sure that they understand the landscape, kind of what we put in those first three chapters. So how do you help somebody that really trying to get people to really have the deeper engagement and really understand the challenge that our current system survives, because many of those folks were successful in the current system, and so they may not see the same challenges that all of our students are facing. And I wonder if you all have thoughts and advice around that particular area.
Archie Holmes looks down. Daisha touches her nose.
I guess I'll start. Probably
Okay.
the greatest success that we've had is with faculty learning communities and with getting student voices heard and amplified, really getting the conversation between the students and the faculty happening. It's not automatic. When you have a faculty learning community or some kind of larger faculty group that you can bring a student panel or a group of students to, it kind of helps quite a bit. We have an ongoing group that we call our Inclusive Excellence Student Advisory Group. That is a multi-year process, and students cycle in. We get new students every year with some old students remaining. And we have that group regularly going out to any kind of opportunity we can have with STEM faculty, whether it's a learning community or other kind of teaching conference that we have regularly, try to get their voice amplified. So those are two quick things I'll contribute.
Yeah, and I would agree with Marco. You actually picked my two really big things. So communities for sure. That's big because, listening to your colleagues and hearing the challenges and then just being able to digest it, I think, is a really good process to actually go through, and reflection. The other thing I would say, I agree with the student voice. We have a whole kind of initiative at our center focused on student partnership. And one of the things that I found to be really powerful is we actually train students on different tools for, thinking about equitable inclusive teaching. So they observe the faculty and they actually give them feedback, which is really neat. And it's a wonderful process. So actually, that student voice, I think, can come in a variety of ways. So there's this idea of like, yeah, do the panels and all that. We do that too, as well. And then also, if you have opportunities for students to actually give you feedback, we like the co-creation model. And I think Deja mentioned that a little bit, in terms of like, how do we get feedback, understanding what our students are experiencing. That can be very powerful, I think, for many instructors, not all, but I think for many, I'll say, because they actually hear the student's experience. And I think that can make an impact. But I do believe, and working with many faculty, that like it's different for each one. So what might resonate with some might resonate with others or not. Some people will need the community of practice model to really think and digest it. Some people it'll be hard for them to hear from students. So I think a diversity of different ways is a good thing, and you have to kind of know where that person is and in terms of what they're willing to think about or what they're willing to do.
Yeah, Deja?
The only additional thing I would add to that is just it takes time. That is the only addition. Like we just have to be really patient and graceful with folks because I feel like everybody's, has so much that they're thinking about and grappling with. So creating the space, as was already said, is important, but just being really patient with people because they're going to be at different places with a lot of this understanding and that we can just bring them along based on where they're at and knowing that they'll get to and it's not a destination, right? Like we're all still on that journey on this journey as well. And so just being really mindful of all of that and working alongside faculty as they're learning and growing in this space.
Yeah, so, Deja, I'm glad you brought that up. And before I give you all an opportunity to make one final comment before I turn it back over to Norma, one of the things that came up in one of our meetings was, a comment that sticks with me even to this day, which is we're not going to be able to 90-minute workshop our way out of this, right? It's like this is not a one and done. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes commitment, reflection, all the things that you all have been talking about, and to be able to go on this journey. So we're about to wrap up and I'm going to turn it back over, but I'll go in kind of reverse order, starting with you, Deja. Are there any last remarks you'd like to make to the group before we conclude?
No, I'm just thankful to be here and excited that we have so many people that are interested in this. And just what I said, to end this is just we're all on this journey together, and it's important to not only be patient with others, but also to be patient with yourself as you're learning and growing and supporting faculty as they grow in this space as well.
Yeah. Marco?
I'll say I think faculty can benefit from mirrors that are based on data to understand what's going on with them and things around them.
3 people smile.
And Tracy?
Yeah, I'll just say like this is really worth it. I know
Yeah.
it might take time. It's like effort. It might be different than some of the practices that, some might be used to. But I've seen so many times over and over again how the adoption of these practices has made such an impact both on the student and the instructor positively. So keep at it, even if it's a small change, it's really worth it. It's worth it for you and your students.
I'm glad you brought that up, Tracy, because I still have, the recollection of working with a student and all of a sudden seeing her eyes light up when when we were able to finally figure out a way to get her to be able to apply the material and just how that opened up so much for that student and to be part of that journey with them was something that was really exciting. And it does take a lot of time for being able to get to that point. So again, Deja, Marco, Tracy, again, thank you all for taking time out for having this conversation and sharing your thoughts with our audience about how they may think about implementing this report. I'm grateful for that. So Norma, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Text please share on right. National Academies Sciences Engineering Medicine logo left.
And I did forget this last part, sorry. If you have ideas about how you have been using the findings to be able to share with us and the principles in your own context, we would love to hear from you. Please, you can put that into the chat in our last 5 minutes, or feel free to reach out to me. You can probably find me online, and I'll be happy to share those information as well. Sorry I forgot about that part, Norma. But back to
No,
you.
that's okay. And please feel free to put it in the chat. We can gather that data and share it with our panelists. It's always interesting, as noted, it was a great nuanced discussion on how to pull together all of that massive information that's in that report, but pick and choose what you can, giving space and time to everybody, making sure that we all understand that it is a circle, not a start and an end point. I think this is something that we all as faculty and administrators need to understand and pick up on. And I'm hoping that this webinar helped in terms of pulling up those nuances of the report and where to start, where to begin your journey through the report. Doesn't have to always be at the beginning, doesn't have to be with chapter 1. So yeah, please share your thoughts in the chat with that. And with that said, I would like to thank Daisha and Tracy and Marco and Archie for joining us today and sharing their thoughts on these 7 principles within the report and how they actually do parallel our transformed learning, digitally enabled evidence-based teaching practices. We encourage everybody to spend more time at the National Academies resources sites. There's a lot of wonderful things there that, you might think they're just STEM oriented, but they can always be used in the humanities and the world of business and things like that as well. So we hope to get our audience more into that and using your all's resources. Come to the Every Learner Everywhere website. We've got plenty of resources there, as well as our Transform Learning website. So thank you again to our distinguished panelists for their time today. Thank you to our audience for being here. For our audience, we do ask that you take just a few minutes out to complete our survey for today's webinar using the link that we dropped into the chat. We benefit from that feedback so that we know where to go with our next set of webinars and how they work out for you all. If you have something else to do right after this, don't worry. We do send you a link to the survey in the follow-up email for your attending, and as well as a link to the recording to the video. So with that said, we really do thank you all once again. Thank our audience for taking time out to be with us today, and we hope to see you in future webinars with Every Learner Everywhere and Transform Learning. Thank you again.